Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations. Welcome back, everyone. Good to be here. Good to have you here. We have the beginnings of another little Cosmere Conversations project. Last time we did religions. It was great. Lots of great feedback. So many people so thoughtful.
Yeah, those were popular episodes, and we did get some really insightful and interesting comments back from listeners. So thanks for reaching out, guys, and having really great things to contribute.
And we are looking ahead, seeing our timeline, knowing that we have this big drought in store. We're like a weird land where the drought goes on for years because we got like almost another year before a published Cosmere novel comes out, which means that we're beginning our Cosmere ReRead.
Woohoo! Finally!
It is all in preparation, all building up to the release of Stormlight number 4, which is planned for next year. We're expecting fall, winter?
Fall. Yeah, right now that the timeline is fall, I am assuming that means it'll be somewhere between September and November.
The timeline is probably going to be October 1st. First week of October. That's my guess.
I don't know. Oathbringer came out like mid-November. So
they did that like soft release, and I kind of wonder if they have plans to do something like that again. For those unfamiliar, they released the first couple of chapters as excerpts on Brandon's website. And so you could start reading maybe in like October, and then the full launch was in early November or something like that. But, you know, I'm just getting my hopes up. 1 month is still pretty good. And we wanted to prepare ourselves for Stormlight 4 by rereading all the major novels of the Cosmere.
Yeah, we've already reread the short stories earlier this year for our short story series we did on the pod, working sort of backwards from Stormlight 4 anticipated release. I will be reading Stormlight Archive next year.
Yeah, just like 1, 2, 3, and then Stormlight 4 releases, and you are finishing 3. That's the goal that you have of the reread, right?
Yeah, well, and I should say also, like, my reread calendar or schedule is specific to my reading pace and events that are happening in my life in the next year.
And the fact that we already reread the short stories, listeners, you didn't even know, this was all part of the plan to inspire an even earlier reread. But the official novels and major stories of the Cosmere all building up to Stormlight 4, I think the timeline that we have set out is a good one. It's obviously a little abbreviated, so if you are planning on following along, put on your reading caps, because there's going to be a lot of reading going, you know, multiple thousands of pages will need to be read in the next year.
Thousands, yeah.
It's a big project. You don't necessarily have to carry it all out. For example, I have many of the novels as audiobooks, and I drive a lot more for my job, so I will be following along on the audiobooks and sometimes giving insights just into the audiobooks about like the different actors and portrayals and stuff going on that side of the equation, so you can follow along in a lot of different forms.
Yeah, so we should talk about how the reread is going to go on this podcast. I would say that the upcoming episodes will be ones that people can kind of pick up anytime as we are rereading. So if you decide to do a different order of your reread, you know, you can kind of check in whenever those episodes are released, jump around to correspond with wherever you are in your particular read.
Or we know that so many people have just gotten into the Cosmere, so maybe you just finished up Mistborn Era 1 and 2, you don't feel like you need to reread those, but it's been a while since you've done the Stormlight Archive. You could just follow along on those Stormlight-specific episodes that we will have for us far in our distant future. But for you, the Magic of Podcast, you can have this anytime. So we hope that this kind of serves as another little series of episodes that can be returned to in the future and refresh or help remind a lot of the major points and the different Cosmere connections.
Yeah, like if you are at a point in your life where you don't have time or resources to do a reread, then hopefully you can just listen to some of the podcast episodes and do a little prep for Stormlight 4 in that way.
We do have so many episodes in the backlog, the category.
Yeah, great point. So if you are wanting a refresh now even, or like super deep dives into specific worlds before Stormlight 4 comes out, we have some great resources in the back catalog.
I think the most obvious is Oathbringer, which we have like 10 different episodes on because we were just so excited for Oathbringer. But I think that is the great thing. We have these resources that can just be picked up at any time for any purposes for anyone. And you know what they say, Brooke, that great minds think alike. We're not the only ones in the Cosmere universe who has been planning for their reread. I've seen multiple different reading lists, suggestions, visuals that show the Cosmere publication order versus the Cosmere timeline. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff coming out right now, so some of you may have seen it if you're on different Facebook groups or Reddit groups that have been part of the inspiration for this series for us. I think everyone's kind of in the same boat. There's a lot of stories out there, and it's a good time to reread them. Yeah,
I would say over the last year, we have had so many requests from listeners to the pod to do a reread.
No, we just started with the short stories. We just mixed those in.
Yeah, we kind of softly eased into it.
And so now we begin the hard work. And other people are as well. For example, I wanted to point, and we'll link this in show notes. I know it's a auditory medium and we're presenting visuals now, but there is a truly remarkable web app that was created by Reddit user Paleo Crafter with some input from friend of the pod, Jafu. And it has a full interactive site that can be viewed in incredible detail. Really remarkable.
Really, really cool. Amazing job on this, Paleo Crafter and Jafu.
The basic concept is that everything can be selected and viewed individually or as a group, and so you can select if you want to view all of the stories in publication order versus Cosmere timeline order, or they can be grouped by series. And I think for our reread, series view on this interactive is probably the best way to follow along. But as we said, read your own read, be out there doing your own thing. You don't need to do everything that we do. However, it's a great resource. It will be linked in the show notes. Again, Paleo Crafter, and it looks like it's just created using GitHub and Vue framework. So it's pretty straightforward, easy. Check it out. It's really beautiful.
It's interactive, color-coded. It is probably the best tool I have seen to figure out how to tackle the Cosmere, because just the way that it's organized, I feel like is much more helpful than just a list, or even a flowchart can be kind of difficult to track through. This is very accessible. Great tool. Check it out.
For our own podcast, Brooke's going to be kind of leading the way, leading the charge.
I haven't done a reread as recently as Tyler has. It's been probably a couple years now since I've read a few of the books. So he's going to do reread light. I'm going to do reread heavy.
And I'll try to mix in some of those audiobooks, as I mentioned before, so I get another take or another view on some of these Cosmere stories. We are as I said, grouping by series more than publication order or Cosmere timeline order. But we think that this is a great way to read almost naturally. I think the publication order is a little unnatural in many ways, just
scattered.
because, it's Brandon's working over many years. This is basically the Netflix and binge model of the reread, because we're just going to be diving into one universe or one planet and reading all the stories that exist there and then moving on to the next one.
Yeah, so we're going to start with Mistborn Era 1, followed by Mistborn Era 2.
And that can also include Mistborn Secret History if you have not read that. We did that reread, so again, that's going to be considered like a novella and not making our official list. But Mistborn Era 1, Mistborn Era 2, Scadrial, pre-Ascension and post-Ascension, a great way to start. And I think many people's first introduction to the Cosmere comes with Mistborn, so it'll be a little bit like take me back to our glory days. our first dipping the toes into the Cosmere universe.
So I'm anticipating that to take me through the new year, probably, I don't know, ending around February, March to get through all of those.
And that's 6 books total, with 3 in the first, 3 in the second. There's a currently unreleased 4th in Era 2, but those 6 books we will be talking about basically, as Brooke said, until February, and just kind of returning every couple of weeks to do a little recap discussion about the books that she has completed and got to, and hopefully we can start off strong in the Scadrian universe, and that'll put us on a good pace to finish this whole reread.
Then we'll do Elantris, again, probably beginning in the spring. It's been a really long time since I've read Elantris in its entirety, so I'm excited for that.
And that is the one that I've never listened to on audiobook.
Ooh.
And am going to try out for this reread. So
Nice.
I'm excited about that. I know nothing, have heard nothing about the Elantris audiobook, but I'll be following along verbally, orally. Sorry for that. That was inappropriate for the children. My fault.
After Elantris, we'll do Warbreaker, which is another one that I have not reread in quite a while, and it's one of my favorites. I'm very excited to revisit it. And the reason for this specific order is I really wanted Warbreaker to be right before I start Stormlight Archive, because as we know, there is some carryover there. So I just kind of wanted to put those in close proximity to maximize my ability to make the connections between the two. After Warbreaker, we will launch right into a Stormlight Archive reread, and I am hoping to be done with everything by like August.
Leaving a little bit of cushion time or buffer time if the reread slows down a bit, and depending on when that 4th Stormlight is released. We have totally possible some of the major novellas that you could throw in there as well. For example, Edge Dancer, part of the Stormlight Archive, happening after Book 2, is really essential and should be considered essential.
Yeah, that would be a great way to read Stormlight Archive. Again, if you hadn't read Edge Dancer as recently as we have, to go Book 1, Book 2, Edge Dancer, Oathbringer. That's excellent reading form.
And there's also The Emperor's Soul, which I will always give a shout out, was the very first thing I read in the Cosmere, a novella that takes place on the same planet as Elantris. So that is a good novella length that is a really good addition if you are also reading Elantris.
And throughout this reread, I would also super encourage anyone listening to interact with us and other listeners on the interwebs. I'm going to create a group, maybe a couple groups on our Facebook page, so that listeners that are already active on the Facebook page can interact with each other and talk about their rereads, anything that they're finding, discovering, questions that they might have, just to make this, a little bit more interactive, keep the momentum going.
And we have been talking about format for the episodes that actually cover books, unlike this one, which is just introductory. But we are thinking about having a little bit more form in our podcast. Normally a freewheeling conversation. We can go anywhere, left, right, up, down. We're like a Wonka Vader. But I think that one of the things that will benefit is having kind of a couple of repeating questions that try to pull out the same information from each book about bigger Cosmere connections. And so if you have ideas about what could be maybe a question that you would want answered about every single book or every single planet or series of novels, that would be great, because we're trying to kind of compile a list of those that could take us through the entirety of this reread.
Just a couple other quick kind of housekeeping items. If you are looking for something else to fill your time in between now and when Stormlight 4 comes out, the sequel to Skyward also recently was released. It is called Starsight. It's a Brandon Sanderson book that is not set in the Cosmere, but it is quite excellent. So I would highly recommend that.
We, again, debated if we should just have a Starsight review on this podcast. We wanted to keep it a little tight. We didn't want to get too far away from our Cosmere roots, but strong recommendation for Starsight and Brandon's willingness to still play outside the Cosmere. He writes so much, it is often easy to forget that there are novels outside the Cosmere.
Well, in that particular series, he said he originally conceived of it as being in the Cosmere. So there are elements that Cosmere lovers will still enjoy, even though it is not within the Cosmere. And I think that Starsight represents a big example of how Brandon is developing as a writer. I just think it's some of the best writing that we've seen from him, and he's a very good writer. So that's saying something.
I think what is really great about that, and as you said, shows his maturity, his development, and just his professionalism as a writer, is how the Cosmere is so vast. The Cosmere stories like Stormlight are so epic that to return and focus really on one character or a small group of characters could seem a little bit like going backwards for someone like Brandon. Oh, you created this big Stormlight Archive and then you go write like a kind of straightforward trilogy, much shorter in length. But the complexity, the depth, the philosophical questions, the dialogue, the character growth, the story arcs, like it is all there. And Brandon is practicing on both the macrocosm and the microcosm, and he's crushing it at every level.
Yeah, 100%. Other housekeeping items to address is this podcast is going to be coming out at the beginning of December, holiday season. We are going to be taking a holiday break from the pod and coming back probably beginning in January, and we'll be discussing Mistborn Year 1 reread.
So that's your timeline. You have from now, at least in our present, a couple of weeks to get on Mistborn. We're rereading currently. We got a head start, I know, because we're behind the scenes, but we just finished Starsight and started rereading Mistborn. It's going to be a long road to get to Stormlight number 4, but we're filling it and jam-packing it with a bunch of Cosmere.
Yeah, so here is your homework assignment. You have a couple weeks to read and then check back in with us. And we wish everyone best of holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate. Going into 2020, big year, new decade.
Yeah, there's always this nice changeover at the end of the year. And I think that the end of a decade is just a little extra oomph, you know? I don't know about everybody else, but my decade was fine. Like, I was alive during this time, so that's pretty dang awesome. And I think that there's only more awesomeness in store.
And we are so appreciative and thankful for all of the great people that we've been able to interact with via this podcast. It's always great to get to talk to other Cosmere fans, people that we can geek out with and talk about some cool stuff. So thanks, listener. Yeah, you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.